It's a pleasure to have you join us on Money Matters. I'm Okbayemi Owosheni. We start off with business news. For the third straight month, Nigeria's headline inflation rate is to 22.22% in June 2025. Now that's down from 22.97% recorded in May 2025. According to data released by the National Bureau of Statistics (NBS) on the 16th of July, it shows that food inflation stood at 21.97% year-on-year in June, when compared to the 21.14% in the previous month. Driven by base effects and improved food supplies, the latest figure represents a 0.75 percentage point decrease, signaling a modest slowdown in the pace of rising consumer prices across the country. An electricity market operator, the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission (NERC), has disclosed that distribution companies, also known as DISCOs, continue to account for a majority of the safety challenges experienced in the Nigerian electricity supply industry. The Commission noted in its first quarter report that cumulatively, the DISCOs accounted for 100% of casualties recorded in the first quarter of 2025, having accounted for 100% and 92.98% and 93.3% in the second quarter of 2024, the third quarter of 2024, and the fourth quarter of 2024, respectively. The regulator linked the cause of the casualties to wire snaps, illegal and unauthorized access, vandalism, unsafe conditions, and falls from heights. The Commission, in a statement, said it has initiated investigations into all reported accidents and will enforce appropriate actions where necessary. We'll take a break now and be back with update from the corporate world. Welcome back. The Dangote Petroleum Refinery and Petrochemicals has uncovered a fresh racket involving some of its affiliate marketers and strategic partners who have been diverting subsidized, refined and refined petroleum products for profit, prompting the suspension of the refinery's discounted fuel supply scheme. The latest directive was disclosed in a letter to all strategic partners issued on the 13th of July 2025 and signed by the group's Chief Executive Director of Commercial Operations, Fatima Dangote. Investigations by the refinery revealed that certain marketers who were granted discounted products meant to ensure affordability and steady supply across retail outlets had been rerouting the loaded trucks to unregistered third-party marketers. And United Bank for Africa (PLC) has disclosed plans to raise over 157 billion naira through a rights issue, according to a notice from the Nigerian exchange NGX to trading license holders. The notice, signed by the head of usual regulation of NGX, revealed that UBA through its stockbroker United Capital Securities Limited submitted an application to list a rights issue of over 3 billion ordinary shares of 50 kobo each at 50 naira per share. According to the details, the offer will be made on the basis of 1 share for every 13 ordinary shares held as of the close of business on July 16, 2025. It's now time for a short break, but when Money Matters return, we'll be discussing Nigeria's economy under late President Muhammadu Buhari. I'll bring you the details after this break. Welcome back. Today we'll be taking a critical look at Nigeria's economy under the administration of late former President Muhammadu Buhari. When Muhammadu Buhari came into office in 2015, many Nigerians had high expectations. His campaign promised to fight corruption, revive Nigeria's economy, and secure the nation. On the economic front, Nigerians hoped for stability, job creation, and long-term development. But what followed was a complex and challenging period. Between 2015 and 2023, Nigeria went through two economic recessions, faced rising inflation, struggled with debt, and witnessed significant unemployment and poverty rates. The Naira lost a large portion of its value, and the country continued to rely heavily on oil. However, the Buhari government also invested heavily in infrastructure, rolled out programs like the Anchor Borrower Scheme, and passed reforms like the Startup Act. So how do we assess the economic legacy of Buhari's years? Were the challenges inevitable due to global events, or were there policy missteps? Did the reforms leave a lasting impact? And most importantly, what lessons can Nigeria learn from that period? To help us unpack all of this, I'm joined by Mr. Vincent Oshoma, who is a financial and economic analyst. Thank you for joining me on the program, Mr. Oshoma. Now, how would you describe Nigeria's overall economic trajectory under Buhari's 8-year tenure, that's from 2015 to 2023?
Nigerian economy under Buhari was mixed because you have some wins, some positive side and some negative side. But generally, for most Nigerians, I think because of the outcome, I think a lot of Nigerians will look at the negative side more, and we talked about judging poorly when they analyze the economy under his administration. But there are certain factors we need to look at, because one of the reasons why Nigeria were actually judging poorly was because of a lot, like you mentioned, rightly mentioned, there was a lot of expectation, and that's why he actually came on board. A lot of Nigerians voted for him because of the change mantra and because of what was happening in the previous administration. People wanted change and they wanted something better. So and that was one of the reasons why it came in, and there was a lot of expectation with respect to the economy, with respect to anti-corruption, with respect to infrastructure, and with respect to insecurity. These were major issues then. So coming in, people expected a lot of progress in those areas. But when you now look at what happened in the period of his administration, they not really say in some areas, especially with the economy, the major improvement, because when you look at the economy, the figure shows that the average growth was quite low, about less than 2%. The highest was about 3% for the period GDP growth. And under his administration, you had two recessions. So these are things that people will look at. But when you also look at what are the factors that led to those things, you now have to recognize some external factors that must have affected his administration. But people will also allude to the fact that what was his level of reaction to those external factors. If I may just quickly just mention some of them. You know that coming in, at the beginning of the administration, there were already issues in the previous administration with respect to oil prices was already trending downwards. So that the administration actually has inherited those challenges, but the response to those challenges was quite poor. When you look at the time it took for the administration to appoint ministers to start formulating policies to respond to these issues. And because of those issues with appointment of ministers and forming a government, it led to Nigeria's first recession, which people will likely blame on him because of the reaction to the issues. But when you look at the second recession that came as a result, which came as a result of COVID, was unexpected. So you cannot actually blame him for that. But the good thing is that his response, you could look at the response in the COVID recession and the previous recession. The COVID headwinds the response was far better. I think they learned from the experience of the first time, and we saw a quick reversal of the outcome as a result of those economic headwinds for the second recession.
All right, now, away from the recession, now one of the major changes that we witnessed during Buhari's administration was the border closure in 2019. And for many, it was seen as a contributing factor to the downturn the economy experienced at that point in time. Now, I would like to know, do you believe the border closure was economically necessary? And what could have been the government's response to this downturn? Do you think the response to the downturns could have been stronger than it was?
Yeah, the border closure was had a major impact because you know that one thing about the Nigerian economy, we have some challenges. The inflation that was caused as a result of that border closure was attributed to the fact that as a result of insecurity in the, say, the northern region, and so we saw that scarcity of increase in price of food. This could have been cushioned by importation from neighboring countries and also but the border closure actually affected the food inflation, and that had an impact. But when you look at it from the other side, the reasons the government gave for the closure was insecurity. I think there was not a well thought out approach, because in process of trying to solve the issue of insecurity, because there is a lot of infiltration from some countries into Nigeria, which the government was trying to stem, they will have also considered the impact it will have on the economy with respect to inflation in terms of the prices of food, and also the fact that you have challenges within. So I think it wasn't a well thought out, but that's why we saw that impact. I think if it was well thought out, we would have looked at a way of having a midway in to be able to solve the issue of insecurity, and also to be able to take care of the impact of that border closure.
Now, let's talk about inflation, though you mentioned it briefly, but it was one persistent challenge that we witnessed during late former President Buhari's administration. It went from 9.6% in 2015 to nearly 25% by 2023. Now, why do you think inflation rose so consistently under his administration, and what do you think he could have done differently to address it?
Yes, inflation was a major issue under Buhari's administration. Some of those inflation, you allude them to some economic headwinds which are not caused by him. But the impact is largely caused by his reaction, the government's reaction to this. Because I'll give you an instance. Like I mentioned, there were some economic headwinds in terms of slump in oil prices during his administration. We also talked about the COVID era, which affected a lot of things, and also talked about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which affected logistics, affected the global economy. But when you now look at the government reaction, in a bid to react to some of all those economic headwinds, the government decided to do a lot of spending. There was one of the goals was to spend, especially during the recession, to spend. The government was looking at spending its way out of the slump in economy. So there was a lot of spending in terms of infrastructure, in terms of so many areas trying to stimulate the economy. And in doing that, that led to a lot of increase in money supply. Definitely, when you have increase in money supply without attendant production, there's like definitely going to be inflation. That is one of the things. Then you also talk about the insecurity. We had a lot of insecurity in the north. It went to the height. There was a time a lot of a good part of the northern part of it was under the control of terrorists. This affected agricultural activities, and definitely that affected food production. Because we look at Nigerian inflation under the boy, it was likely driven by increase in food prices. So I think those are some of the factors. I think the major thing I would say about the administration, beyond the external factors that they had to grapple with, it has to do with the reaction to some of those factors. And I can say that one of the things I would say about that we had an administration that was more in terms of its policies, its mindsets. It has for socialist mindset policy. So we have a government that was driven by social policies. And when you now have the issues in a social environment, when you have the kind of challenges we have, social policies hardly survive, because you need a lot of spending. But when you don't have the resources to promote those policies, definitely you will have issues. And that's one of the things we saw. The government's reaction to some of those policies, some of those economic headwinds was what led to a lot of the downturn in the administration. That's led to those outcomes that would definitely the government will take responsibility for.
Right now, let's talk about the Naira redesign. It was one policy that happened towards the end of the late former president's tenure, and many attribute the policy directly to the president, who said it was intended to curb corruption ahead of the 2023 elections. Now, in your view, do you think the Naira redesign was an effective anti-corruption tool, or was it economically disruptive, seeing that it had so many economic implications on Nigerians during that period of time?
Yes, the Naira redesign was a good policy, but like we always have in Nigeria, it is one thing to have a good policy. The implementation of the policy is very, very important. It was poorly implemented, and that's why we saw such impact. Because when you look at the policy, they talked about the need to look at bring a lot of currency into the banking system, a lot of money outside the government control of the deposit money banks, and they need to bring them, and also for security to fight corruption. Those are good intentions, but when you look at it, is the implementation. Because in doing that policy, it was looked at a policy that was rushed in implementation, and you didn't have enough new currency while you were withdrawing the old currency, putting them out of circulation. That was one of the issues that led to the challenges we have. And unfortunately, Nigerians suffered for it. Nigerians had to start buying the Naira with Naira. It was an unfortunate experience, which I know Nigerians want to go back to. I think it has to do with poor implementation. The intention was well thought out and everything they talked about, but the implementation was very poor, and that's what such outcome.
Now, few subsidies remained in place throughout Buhari's presidency, but it was removed almost immediately by his successor, that President Bola Tinubu. Do you think the subsidy removal would have had a more positive impact if it had been implemented under Buhari's administration?
Yeah, the subsidy removal was supposed to be implemented under Buhari. There were talks about it, but he kept on kicking the can ahead. And that's why I said it has to do with the mindset of the president. He has a socialist mindset, and he had good intentions for Nigeria. But when you are faced with a situation whereby you want the good intention, but you don't have the money to sustain it, it was high time the president took a decision and made Nigerians to realize that we cannot continue like this because we will be postponing the evil day. And that was a decision he didn't want to take, and that's why we saw that. That's why you saw during the election, almost the presidential candidate mentioned the fact that subsidy was going to be removed. It has to do with how are you going to remove it. They have different ideas on how it was going to be removed, but as regards removing it, it was a policy that was inevitable, and the previous government knew about it. That's why the PIA talked about it was passed, which was one of the major positive points of the previous the late president administration, the passing of the PIA, which was a good thing. And part of the PIA was the removal of subsidy, but he extended it. Despite the implementation of the PIA, the part that has to do with subsidy was postponed, and that has to do with and for political reasons. So I can say that it was something that was inevitable, but he refused to take that because I will allude it to his socialist tendencies and socialist mindset.
Right now, debt was also one thing that was really high during late former President Buhari's administration too. Now, do you think borrowing was necessary for development, or did it point to deeper fiscal issues that could have been better handled?
Borrowing, like everybody will say, is not bad in sense, but especially when you look at a country like Nigeria that has huge infrastructural deficits, and if you want to grow quickly, you needed to borrow. But you have to borrow. There is need to borrow and to match what you're borrowing with the right projects. So in the Buhari's administration, there was a lot of borrowing, which led to a lot of fiscal issues, and it also raised the issue I brought about the issue of debt servicing, whereby there was debt, though we had a good debt to GDP ratio, which the government was always branding. We have a very poor debt to revenue ratio, and the government was not actually considering that. And because despite the fact that the government was borrowing for infrastructure project, the government was also largely borrowing to fund recurrent expenditure. That was a definitely borrowing to fund recurrent expenditure is a bad debt. And also the issue of the where the government also borrowed from. It got to a stage the government started borrowing from the CBN and exceeded the limit to borrow. That's what led to a huge waste and means of over 20-something trillion. So that was those issues and so the issues that people will always talk about. Like I always said, like I said, it was the IT alluded to a socialist mindset because it wanted to develop the economy, especially with the recession and the challenges we wanted to spend, and they also wanted to make an impact in this administration. But the resources to make such impact was not available, and it took the government much time to get to that reality, and that's it. That's why you see, if you look at the current administration, though there are some issues people will talk about, is the fact that the current administration will just decide to fix the issues and not continue to live in a paradise of as if everything is okay when things are not actually okay. You don't have the funds, so you have to make a decision.
All right, looking ahead, which economic policies introduced by the Buhari administration do you believe should be continued under the Tinubu government, and which ones do you think should be reformed or discontinued?
One thing I will say that with the previous administration, so if you look at the policies of the previous administration, one, the passing of the PRA is something that was very good because several governments has tried. We have since the coming of this democracy, there have been several efforts to pass the PRA and failure, but he was able to achieve that, and so we have the PRA, so which was a good thing. So that is something, but there's a lot in terms of implementation. We have not seen much. The current government is currently working on it, but we have not seen work. Because one of the things in PRA is the need for the NNPC to be listed, but now they have talked about postponing it till 2020, which is not in line with the plan. So that's one thing. We need to see more implementation, progressive implementation of the PRA. Then you also talked about the infrastructural development on that part. I talked about the rails, I talked about the roads. Lagos Ibadan Expressway was there for years under the Buhari administration. It was something that was completed, the second Niger bridge. So Nigerians who want to see more of those kind of projects that have an impact on the people, and those are some of the areas that then I talk about some of the socialist policies, like I talked about the cash transfer. I think under the Buhari administration, Nigerians will say there were more of that compared to now. I think because of the impact, when you look at the current policies and the impact it's having on the poor, there is need for us to look for a way of reducing the impact it's having. But then you talk about the airport infrastructure, there's a lot of airport remodeling that was done. So I think those are the major areas I highlight that we want to see more happen in this current administration.
All right, just before I let you go, Mr. Oshoma, now, Buhari has come, he has made his impact as the president. Now, what would you say is Buhari's lasting economic legacy that he'll be remembered for?
I would say is economic legacy. One thing that Nigerians will remember Buhari for is that he had a lot of good intention, but unfortunately, there were a lot of factors that he could not implement those implementations. That we can also say he came in at a time when his health was already failing, was quite old, so he was a lot of limitation in terms of implementing his plans. That's one thing Nigerians we look at. But when you talk about the infrastructural development that we made under his administration, you always be remembered for those things. Like the second Niger bridge, it was achieved under his administration. You talk about the railway infrastructure that was built under his administration. Nigerians will remember him for those. Then you now talk about some of the efforts mention the PRA. It will always go his name that it was under his administration that will pass the PRA. Then we'll talk about the TSA and some other things. These are things that Nigerians we always remember him for. And also based on his shortcomings, maybe people will look at his age and the challenges he had with his health, and also the challenges, external challenges that we have. Then Nigerians may also be considerate in analyzing his tenure.
Well, financial and economic analyst, Mr. Vincent Oshoma, thank you for lending your thoughts on the program.
Thanks for having me.
pleasure, sir. And that's it on this episode of the program. Many thanks for joining us. I'm Okmayemi Obosheni. See you next time.